Assalamu alaikum, good afternoon. It's my great pleasure to have been invited by Mile and Dr. 3M to give this webinar, and today we'll be discussing the opportunities presented by Saudi Vision 2030, and in particular, the opportunity for the Kingdom to lead the world in leadership. And as part of that, I'll also be presenting various ways in which you and your organisations can maximise these opportunities and build great leaders. At Oxford Strategic Consulting, we carry out high-impact research, advisory work and consulting for organisations and governments across the GCC, especially in the Kingdom, and especially on implementation and response to Saudi Vision 2030. And we're currently engaged in several projects to help private and public sector organisations to maximise the opportunities that the new vision provides. Saudi Vision 2030 is one of the most comprehensive, far-reaching and well-designed national plans we've seen, and we've been involved in many. And anyone who thinks it isn't going to happen and is therefore waiting for everything to go back to normal is severely mistaken and will miss out on enormous opportunities. The research has shown that current approaches to leadership are mostly too expensive, too slow, too old-fashioned and don't even work. As we'll see, Saudi Vision 2030 requires a huge number of world-class leaders now. So I'll be showing you a new technology-based approach based on a major study carried out with the premier global leadership body, the Chartered Management Institute. There's lots of times for questions, so we can cover any aspects you're particularly interested in, but in this main presentation we'll discuss the main human capital implications of Saudi Vision 2030, the critical need to develop world-class Saudi leaders and how to build these world-class strategic capabilities so you and your organisations can benefit from the opportunity that Saudi Vision 2030 provides. The vision represents a significant shift in strategic focus as well as a shift in the capabilities needed. It's a shift from the public to the private sector. It's a shift from imports to self-reliance, for example in the manufacture of military equipment. It's a shift from oil to a diversified economy, and a major shift from migrant labour to the development of national human capital, particularly in the private sector and particularly in leadership roles. In terms of human capital, let's just consider the numbers. The Kingdom currently has a national labour force of around 6.4 million, with 4.2 million in the public sector, 1.6 million in the private sector, and about 11% or 600,000 unemployed. By 2030, it will have a labour force of around 8 million, with a target of 3.4 million in the public sector, and only about 7% or around 560,000 unemployed. This means the private sector needs to employ a further 2.3 million Saudis. And of course, most of this 8 million total workforce have not even entered the labour force yet. So this is a huge development challenge for employers and certainly might be seen as a huge opportunity for education and training providers. But which sectors will absorb these new Saudi professionals? Here are some of the main areas mentioned in the transformation plan, with numbers derived from the plan itself and from our various research analyses. These are all areas where Saudi Arabia wishes to compete with the very best in the world. To become world-class, all these areas will need to be made attractive to Saudi nationals, and all will require the development of world-class strategic capabilities. So it's worth thinking about not just what types of people might be required, but also what kind of strategic capabilities will the nation need to build in order to become world-beating in all these sectors. First, we have best practice capabilities, as we call them, which are needed to even begin to compete. So for example, for the military supply sector, we might need specialised engineering skills. Secondly, there are differentiating strategic capabilities which are unique, valuable and hard to copy and provide sustainable competitive advantage. We're not going to discuss these in detail here, but these differentiating capabilities are crucial if you want to become globally competitive. So contact me if you want to know more. And finally, let's think about the enabling capabilities. These are the overriding capabilities that are needed across sectors and in all organisations. Here again, we have a wealth of research and experience to draw on, and we've helped many organisations and countries to build these capabilities. These include things like HR and IT, but most of all, leadership. So the most important strategic capability for the success of any venture, and particularly Saudi Vision 2030, is leadership. As we can see, leadership has a fundamental impact on all aspects of organisational and national success, and indeed the well-being, happiness and productivity of all of us. I'm not going to distinguish between leadership and management, as today we're interested in practical impact rather than academic debate, but feel free to contact me if you'd like to discuss. Leadership is generally thought of as highly complex, but here's a simple guide. Think back to the best and worst boss you ever had. Make a list of all the things the worst boss did that you hated and don't do them to others, ever. Then make a list of all the things that the best boss did that you loved and always do them to others. So it is possible to see leadership as simple. In fact, of course, leadership is complex and simple at the same time. Some aspects, which we describe as task leadership, are relatively simple, whereas some transformational aspects, which include enthusing and engaging people, can be very complex indeed. Like any other models, these models of leadership need to be used with care. It's possible to leave tasks without allowing the team to participate, and that's a great way to lose people on the journey. And it's possible to have an engaging transformational leadership style, but still get lost through poor planning, and that's not what you want your team members to feel like. As we well know, huge investments have been made in leadership training, tools and help for many years, and there are clear definitions of best practice, mostly from the West, for leaders to follow. But is this best practice leadership working? I'm afraid not. 43% of managers rate their own manager as ineffective. Only 32% of people trust their immediate leader, and ineffective management costs $30 billion a year in the UK alone. But let's see this as an opportunity. In this webinar, we'll explore practical, easy and fast ways to massively improve leadership effectiveness in the Kingdom and indeed worldwide. And we will be given an example of a completely new approach to engagement and leadership based on advanced research and technology. But first, it's crucial to have some idea of how many leaders are needed to implement Saudi Vision 2030. In general, based on worldwide studies, we estimate that around 8% of the workforce need to be leaders. In the UK, this means out of a total population of 60 million, then 4.8 million need to be leaders. If we assume we'd like UK nationals to do the leading, then given that we have 5 million expats, we still only need less than 10% of our UK workforce to be leaders. The same applies in most of the developed markets that have lowish immigrant populations. Now, if you only need 10% of your people to be leaders, then you can perhaps afford the common leadership development model, which is to let everyone compete to become leaders and then let people fight it out until a few emerge by luck, favour and perseverance. Some of them might even be good leaders. Some of them might even have had some training, and some of them might even be qualified. But we don't see this as anything like a sensible approach, even for the UK, never mind a fast-growing economy like Saudi Arabia. So how many leaders does the Kingdom need in order to implement Saudi Vision 2030? Well, there's a working population of around 24 million in total, so we need around 1.9 million leaders. There's about 15 million Saudis in the potential working population, and around 10 million expats. So roughly 2 million Saudis need to be world-class leaders, which is about 13%. This is much too high to rely on luck, and the need is much too urgent to rely on a gradual gaining of experience over a lifetime. We need 2 million great leaders right now. So how can we build 2 million leaders fast and lead the world in leadership? First, we need to work from the strengths of the country, its culture and the people, so we can fast-track Saudis into leadership roles. Second, we need to ensure we have world-class leaders by making sure they're fully qualified and accredited to a world-class standard. Thirdly, as well as taking action for people who are or about to be leaders, we need to start growing leaders from an early age, and as we will see, Saudi has some real advantages in this. And lastly, we need to provide practical, easy-to-use tools to deal with some of the most difficult tasks that new leaders face. And I'll be showing you the first app, iLeader, to provide tools for these tricky tasks, as well as giving continuous feedback on engagement and productivity. And instead of simply adopting best practices in leadership development, which doesn't seem to work, let's think about the specific advantages that Saudi might have in developing great leaders. First of all, can you fast-track Saudis into leadership positions, or do you need years of experience to be a leader? Well, you don't need to have cleaned rooms in order to run a hotel, and you don't need to have maintained a plane in order to lead an airline. What you do need is to have acquired leadership skills. There are numerous examples worldwide of fast-track schemes, including graduates and military training, and all of these focus on instilling the key leadership skills. But in Saudi, as in the rest of the GCC, there are two exemplary situations in which young males and females are often fast-tracked and often do a great job. The first is the royal family itself, of course, and the second are the family firms where young successors are trained from birth in the obligations and skills needed to lead. So we have some great role models of male and female Saudis who have become very effective leaders very fast, despite often not having been subjected to a formal leadership assessment centre, not having suffered the indignity of a performance management review, and not even experienced the joys of a leadership training event. Secondly, Saudi and the Gulf in general has a unique leadership style which in many ways has advantages over the best practice Western style which is taught on many courses today. We're one of the very few institutions and academics to research the Gulf leadership style, but we found that it has real strengths in areas where best practice leadership has been failing. It can be extremely effective in gaining buy-in for a shared vision of the future. It can generate high levels of enthusiasm and engagement. It's much more adaptable than some Western models, and it can generate great loyalty and responsibility amongst followers. On the other hand, we find the pure Gulf leadership style is potentially weaker at task management, having tough conversations, dealing with conflict, and driving individual achievement. So interestingly enough, the Gulf leadership style is great at the top of organisations, whereas the best practice leadership style is best at leading projects. So if Saudi needed to utilise expat leaders because of numbers, then I'd focus them on the more junior roles, whilst letting the Saudis lead from the top. Of course, what this all really means is that the Saudi leader has the opportunity to have two leadership styles available, one for setting the vision and engaging the teams, and the other for planning and implement projects on time and budget. So why bother with the Gulf leadership style, which we teach and publish on? Well, leading is about getting stuff done. Best practice leadership doesn't always work. The best leadership style depends on the context and the objectives, so the best leaders have a range of styles they can deploy, and the Gulf leadership style is a valuable addition and one where Saudis have a natural advantage. The second way in which we can build 2 million leaders fast is to make sure that all Saudi leaders are fully qualified and accredited to a world-class standard. Many business schools and institutions offer leadership training, but you do need to make sure their short courses are actually accredited, not just with an attendance certificate. We favour qualifications such as the Chartered Management Institute, which allows you to add MCMI after your name and is fully recognised worldwide. And CMI qualifications, for example, are offered by many institutions, including Henley Business School and my own company, OSC, and it's the only qualification with a UK Royal Charter. The third way we can grow leaders, 2 million leaders, don't forget, and continue to grow them, is to start early. This guy's have got an expression exactly like my past boss, and in which case he's a terrible leader. The best way to train leadership skills very early is to provide experiences of leadership. So youngsters should be encouraged to organise voluntary groups, take charge of something, learn from great leaders, do something new, and so on. The very best way to learn to be a leader is to be a leader. For kids, the best kinds of leadership activities are fast and exciting, with challenge and competition, but also where they get to form teams and experience success. This is based on a whole wave of very strong research and applies to both girls and boys, but boys in particular do not seem to suit the main current models of education. They need stuff fast, furious, competitive, and above all, with lots of approval and feedback. We boys, it turns out, are very sensitive after all. The fourth way to build 2 million leaders fast is to give them practical tools so they can be great from day one. And these days we need to carefully think about how to fully utilise new technologies to provide these tools. In a few years' time, this might include virtual reality learning or artificial intelligence, but right now we have the potential for the most powerful leadership toolkit right in our pocket, the smartphone. And of course, Saudi Arabia and the GCC in general has one of the highest rates of smartphone penetration on the planet. Everyone has already got the toolbox, now let's provide the tools. Over the past year, we carried out a major research project for the Chartered Management Institute on how leaders learn effectively and what would be the best and most advanced methods going forward. This report, Learning to Lead, has been widely quoted and gives lots of useful information, so let me know if you'd like a copy. We identified that despite huge investments in leadership development, the various outcomes of leadership, like engagement, were still awful. Why is this? Mainly because the current methods of teaching leadership are expensive, time-consuming, and unfortunately ineffective. Leaders, and indeed everyone else, actually learn by doing stuff as they need to. They use tools as they're needed, and as we all know, they absorb practical knowledge in bite-sized chunks. We found that leaders, especially new leaders, found some tasks very difficult, and because they didn't know what they were doing, they often got them wrong, and this caused great lack of confidence and in turn led to poor leadership performance, which again in turn impacts the performance and engagement of the team. When having a difficult conversation, for example, our leaders often didn't apply the most basic rules, such as making sure the room is private, focusing on the issue, not the person, have a clear idea of the ideal outcome, let the person speak, and so on. Surprisingly enough, we found that some very simple guidance, if available at the very point of the difficult conversation, could make an enormous difference. The obvious answer was to deliver great leadership tools through an app, but we found that the current solutions in general simply dumped training content onto phones. So we had to make our own, iLeader, which is based on all our research and experience. iLeader helps leaders to do the most important, time-consuming and difficult things, and to understand and maximise the engagement and productivity of their teams for a fraction of the time and cost of traditional or even e-learning. First, we identify the most common leadership or management tasks that leaders find difficult, important and time-consuming, and we've then built tools to do these tasks, not to train the leader, but to help them actually do these things. So if the leader has to run an effective meeting, the tool is with him or her. If they have to make a great decision, the tool is there to help them do it. So the whole focus is on doing stuff rather than just learning about stuff. We talked earlier about engagement, and many of you will be familiar with the annual engagement survey that most organisations use. Sadly, this is of no use whatsoever to the individual leader, because engagement happens daily and I need to act now. So iLeader provides a daily dashboard on engagement and productivity of the team, and even recommends the actions and the tools that the leader can then use to address any issues. Each team member simply uses a slider as shown to record their view on the enthusiasm and productivity of the team. Various experiments showed that this question was much more likely to be completed honestly than if we'd asked, how productive were you today, or how enthusiastic was your team leader? And of course you can see the history over time. iLeader then uses that feedback to suggest actions and tools to use. So for example, if Sarah, second from the top, has scored enthusiasm and productivity as red, then iLeader might suggest that the leader has a chat with her to discuss and resolve any issues, and it will help them to do it. Similarly, if the whole team had scored enthusiasm as red, then iLeader would suggest a morale meeting and provide the tool to make it successful. So here is one of the tools that helps the leader to have a frank conversation. It first provides a simple checklist with a link through to much more detail if needed. It steers the leader through the preparation, it creates the invitation, and can be used to guide the actual conversation in real time. It agrees the solution and the actions, and finally documents and generates the follow-ups. So by guiding and doing the task, in this case a frank conversation, the tool helps the leader to learn by doing, with good practice incorporated into the way the tool drives the task. Similarly, the Make a Great Decision tool allows the leader to specify the main options, what kinds of things can you decide between, and then the criteria on how we'll judge the decision, and then to weight the options in order to suggest the best decision, which in this case is to recruit Aisha. We do find that sometimes people don't agree with the recommended decision, and this makes them go back and think about the criteria and the weightings, and this is an excellent thing to do in decision making. So once again, the tool does the task and helps the leader learn through doing, and it also provides an ongoing tool set which will always be useful, just like an electric drill. The app also uses the feedback to drive a weekly team review to discuss and resolve issues of engagement or productivity, as well as normal topics like progress and so on. And it also supports the iLeader network, which, as it develops, will provide help from leaders by leaders as a self-supporting community. Of course, the tricky tasks for leaders may vary by organisation, so a review can be carried out to identify the most important, difficult and time-consuming tasks for your leaders. The process uses a weighting system to provide a very useful factual list of the top tasks that leaders find difficult and important. And this is used to decide on the top tools that would be needed by your leaders. So this is iLeader, the first and only example of a leadership toolkit which provides a daily dashboard on the team's engagement and productivity, and a simple, easy-to-use toolset for leadership tasks that leaders find the most challenging. So let's summarise. We've shown that leadership is a key capability for Saudi Vision 2030, and we need to grow 2 million leaders fast. Based on extensive research, we've given 4 ways in which Saudi can lead the world in leadership. First, by exploiting Saudi's key advantages, such as the Gulf leadership style, qualifying Saudi leaders to world-class standards, such as CMI, starting early to develop great leaders, and lastly, by using technology to provide continuous feedback on engagement and productivity and the tools to be a great leader now. Thank you so much for your kind attention. Feel free to contact me for more information about anything we've discussed. Shukran jazilan.